I don't really know where to start. There are things in life that leave such a deep impression that even remembering them hurts. But I think it's time to tell you. Not because it's easy, but because I know someone out there might need to hear it. I was 14 years old. Etzel. A girl. Insecure, full of small dreams and huge fears. I liked to lie in bed listening to music, laughing at silly things with my friends and hiding behind my notebook when the teacher asked questions. But one day, everything changed. In a way I never imagined. Suddenly, the world became heavier. The voices around me became harsher. And the girl I was began to disappear, a little more each day. I started to feel strange things. In my body, in my soul. I felt like something was wrong or too different for me to understand. But I couldn't tell anyone. Not even my friends. They would never understand. I didn't understand either. Silence became my best friend and my worst enemy. I smiled in front of everyone, but inside I was screaming. I kept asking myself, why me? But I couldn't find an answer. The nights got too long. I would lie down and stare at the ceiling, my heart heavy and my mind far away. I was afraid of tomorrow, but even more afraid of continuing to pretend that everything was fine. At home, things weren't easy. My mother worked all day. Tired. Stressed. She barely stopped to ask how I was. And even when she did, I would just say, fine. Because it wasn't the right time. Never seemed like the right time. Little by little, I started to distance myself from people. I would skip school for any reason. I didn't want to be seen. I didn't want to deal with questions, looks, judgments. Felt different. And not in a good way. Inside, it was like a weight was growing, suffocating me, trapping me in a dark place. And the worst part was that no one saw it. No one asked what was really happening to me. I had to learn to hide my tears in the bathroom, faking laughter during recess, hiding the pain behind bangs and headphones. I became an expert at looking good when everything inside me was falling apart. There was a day when I looked in the mirror and almost didn't recognize myself. That happy girl I used to be was gone. And in her place there was another one. Scared, silent, full of secrets. The pain didn't scream. It whispered slowly every day, reminding me that something much bigger was coming. Something that I still couldn't face head on. But that followed me, squeezed me, surrounded me. Even so, I kept going. One step at a time. Even though I was scared. Even though I didn't know where it would all lead. Because stopping wasn't an option. No one would stop the world for me. I had to keep going. But if there's one thing I've learned, it's that life never warns you when it's going to turn upside down. And when it does, you either sink or you learn to swim. And it was there, in that silence, in that darkness, that I began to transform. Without understanding, without wanting to. But perhaps, deep down, I already knew. Nothing would ever be the same again. The weeks began to pass, but inside me time seemed to stand still. I looked at other girls my age and wondered how they could still smile so easily. It was as if their world was going on as normal. And mine had frozen in a place where no one else could see. My steps became slower. My thoughts became heavier. Waking up in the morning was difficult. Getting dressed, looking in the mirror, leaving the house. Everything seemed to require an effort that I no longer had. At school, I began to notice the looks. Some of pity, others of judgment. But the worst were the whispers. Conversations cut off as soon as I got close. As if I had become a problem, a walking scandal. I wanted to scream, I wanted to explain, I wanted to ask them to stop. But the words died in my throat. because I didn't know what to say. Not to them. Not to myself. All I felt was this tightness in my chest that nothing would go away. My relationship with my mother became even more distant. She was quieter, colder. Sometimes she would watch me from afar, as if she were trying to understand what was wrong, but she never really asked. And I couldn't tell her either. I started sleeping more and more. It was the only way to escape. To escape reality, even if only for a few hours. But even in my dreams, anguish followed me. I would wake up with my heart racing and a strange sensation in my body, as if something was about to happen. One late afternoon I sat alone in the backyard and looked at the sky. It was blue, beautiful, calm. So different from me. And in that silence, I wondered if I would ever feel light again. Or if that was all that was left of my life now. Some people tried to get closer. Teacher asked if everything was okay. I answered with a hurried yes, afraid of what might happen if I let the truth slip. She just nodded and moved on, like everyone else did. My friends started to disappear, one by one. Some stopped responding to my messages. Others just pretended nothing was happening. Deep down I understood. It's hard to deal with what we don't understand. And I didn't know how to deal with myself. There were days when I hated myself. Felt weak, stupid, lost. I blamed myself for everything, even without understanding what exactly I had done that was so wrong. But the pain was real. And it needed someone to blame. And that someone was always me. My body started to change. Small things, almost imperceptible to others, but glaring to me. I felt everything more sensitive, more tense. It was as if something inside me was trying to get attention. And I struggled to pretend I didn't see it. The routine became a burden. Eating, walking, sitting in class. Nothing was easy. Everything seemed to be carrying an invisible burden. And the worst part, no one noticed. It was as if I were screaming underwater, watching everyone else live while I drowned in silence. Sometimes I would write in a hidden notebook. Loose words, broken sentences. It was the only place where I could be honest. It was there that I let out the confusion, the fear, and that feeling that something was out of place and could no longer be ignored. I knew that at some point I would no longer be able to hide it. That everything I had been feeling would overflow. But I wasn't ready yet. I didn't know how to tell it, or to whom, or where to start, so I kept pretending, one day after another. Pretending that I was still just a girl. Pretending that my life wasn't about to turn upside down. Pretending that I was strong enough to handle everything alone. I woke up that day with my heart tighter than ever. It was a strange feeling, as if something inside me was screaming, but I couldn't understand what it was saying. I looked in the mirror and didn't recognize the reflection. It was me, but it wasn't. Something was happening. I could feel it in my body, in my skin, in my eyes. It was a silent weight, a transformation that no one saw, or maybe they pretended not to see. And somehow that made me feel even more alone. I went to school as usual. I pretended to be fine as always. But that day was different. People seemed to look at me more closely, as if they knew something that even I couldn't put into words yet. During recess, a classmate took me aside. She asked if I was okay. For the first time I almost said no. But I swallowed my answer and smiled. The lie seemed easier to me than dealing with the avalanche that would come if I told the truth. Every corner of the school seemed too cramped for me. The noise bothered me. The smell of the lunch made me sick. I sat alone near the window and stayed there, trying to take a deep breath, trying to keep myself together. At home, my mother started to notice the way I kept quiet more, how I avoided eating certain things, how I walked slower, how I slept too much. She didn't ask, but her gaze changed little by little. And that scared me more than any question. I started to close myself off even more. I distanced myself from what little I had left. I no longer answered messages. I hid in my room all day. I wanted to disappear, but at the same time I knew I couldn't. Something inside me kept me here. I started to cry in secret, quietly under the pillow so no one could hear. I was ashamed of my tears, as if even my suffering needed to be hidden. As if I didn't have the right to feel what I felt. The pains started. Small at first, like strange tickles inside. Then stronger. It was as if my body was trying to tell me something. I just didn't know what. Or maybe he knew, but didn't want to admit it. I remember one night in particular. The lights in my room were off, the house was silent, and I was holding my stomach in my hands. It wasn't a common pain. It was deeper, more emotional than physical. A mix of fear and guilt, as if time was demanding an answer from me. No one ever taught me how to deal with it. No one prepared me for this kind of emptiness. School talks about formulas, historical dates, and grammar. But it doesn't teach you what to do when your soul starts to get lost in silence. Felt small, unprotected. It was as if the world was too big for me, and at the same time I was carrying something that no longer fit inside me. Something that grew even in silence. I started writing letters that I never delivered. Some to my mother, others to myself. Words that I needed to get off my chest. As if writing was the only way to keep from going crazy. Every day it became clearer. I couldn't run away for much longer. The truth was knocking on the door. And I knew that sooner or later everything would come to light. But I wasn't ready yet. Even so, I kept going. Because sometimes what keeps us standing isn't strength. It's the fear of falling. I couldn't hide from myself anymore. The mirror no longer lied, and my body began to speak for me, even when my mouth insisted on silence. There were signs, clear, repetitive, and now impossible to ignore. I remember the day I sat on the bed and cried non-stop. For no apparent reason. I just cried. Because I felt like I was overflowing. With fear, with shame, with doubts. And because, deep down, I already knew. I just didn't want to accept it. I started counting the days. Remembering the nights. Choices. The words I heard. The touches that marked me. And everything fit together like hard pieces of a puzzle that I never wanted to put together. I tried to look for answers on the internet, secretly, deleting the history soon after. I read stories that scared me. I saw stories that were similar to mine, but that ended in ways I didn't even want to imagine. At school, my body was starting to bother me. My clothes didn't fit like they used to. The looks became more frequent, the jokes more cruel. I pretended not to hear. But each word pierced me like a knife. My best friend asked me with a tense look if there was something I wanted to tell her. I nodded and smiled, trying to appear normal. But my eyes were shaking. And I think that at that moment she knew, even if I didn't say it. At home, my mother looked at me strangely. One day, she knocked on the door and asked if I was sick. I told her that I was just tired. But deep down, I begged her to insist, to ask one more time. Because I didn't know where to start. The pain intensified. It wasn't strong enough to knock me down, but it was there all the time. Silent, constant. Like a reminder that I was no longer alone. and that there was something inside me that would change everything. I started having strange dreams. I dreamed of distant crying, of small hands trying to touch me. I woke up scared, with my heart racing, feeling that something much bigger than me was approaching. Fear became routine. Fear of being discovered. Fear of being judged. Fear of being left. But, above all, fear of not being able to cope. 'Cause I was just a girl. A girl with the weight of a decision that she didn't even know how to make. I tried to rehearse some conversations. Alone, in front of the mirror. I tried to imagine how my mother would react. I thought of the right words. But none of them seemed enough. Everything seemed small compared to what I needed to say. The days became quieter. I felt like a ghost inside my own house, watching everything happen but unable to participate. Guilt enveloped me like a heavy blanket, and each day I felt less alive. It wasn't just my body that was changing. It was my mind. It was the way I saw things. The way I started to look at myself. I no longer saw myself the way I used to. There was something new, something scary, but also mysteriously strong. Something was forming inside me, something that I still couldn't name out loud. But it was there, present, palpitating, growing, transforming me into someone I was still learning to know. And it was in this silence, between hidden tears and sleepless nights, that I began to understand. The truth was coming, and I would no longer be able to run away from it. I didn't choose that moment. I didn't plan it. I didn't rehearse it. Just escape. It was as if, after so much time trying to hide it, my body had decided to speak for me. And when my mother came into the room, she found me bent over, crying, unable to breathe properly. She came over and asked me what was wrong. For the first time, I didn't answer with a nothing. I just looked at her. And that look said it all. The silence between us was louder than any scream I'd ever heard. She sat on the edge of the bed, waiting for me to say something. But I couldn't. My hands were shaking. My throat hurt. And that's when she spoke herself in a low, hard voice. "Are you?" I just closed my eyes. And she understood. Her scream pierced me like a knife. It was a scream of pain, of anger, of disappointment. A scream I'll never forget. She stood up abruptly, put her hands on her head, and began to pace back and forth, as if trying to wake up from a nightmare. I begged her to listen to me. I tried to explain. But what explanation could justify this at 14 years old? I was still a child. And now I carried another one inside me. And that seemed unforgivable to her. The words came hard, sharp. "You ruined your life. You destroyed everything. How could you do this to me?" I just cried, because deep down I felt destroyed too. I also didn't know how I had let everything get to this point. She left the room and slammed the door hard. I was left alone, huddled together, feeling the ground slipping away. I knew that this would happen one day. But knowing didn't lessen the pain, nor the fear, nor the shame. After that, the silence in the house grew heavier. My mother spent days without saying a word to me. I would hear her crying in the early hours of the morning. And that broke me. Because even with all the pain I felt, it was still her pain that crushed me inside. I began to feel like a mistake, burden, as if the mere existence of what was growing inside me was a sentence. I looked at myself in the mirror and saw a girl, lost, tired, who could no longer go back. School, the news spread. I don't know who told it. But soon the looks, the whispers, the muffled laughter in the hallways began. I walked with my head down, without the courage to look anyone in the eye. Everything inside me seemed to scream shame. Even the teachers changed their tone. Some pretended they didn't know. Others treated me with a strange delicacy, as if I was breaking inside and no one knew how to put me back together. I wanted to disappear. I wanted to sleep for weeks and wake up in another body, another life. But I couldn't. 'Cause now, I was no longer alone. Even though I was rejected, even though I was judged, even though I was scared, I carried inside me a life that asked for nothing more than to exist. And no matter how much everything hurt, no matter how much the world seemed to be falling apart, there was a small part of me that, deep down, wanted to fight. Not for myself, but for what was still growing silently inside me. And there, in that moment, amidst the tears and the pieces that were left of me, I understood. Nothing would be the same again. And I would have to be strong, even without knowing how. After that day, everything changed. The house I grew up in became a strange place. The walls seemed colder, the air heavier, my mother's gaze distant. She saw me, but she didn't see me like before. I began to realize that my name had become synonymous with disappointment. I didn't need to hear it directly. It was in the silences, in the doors that didn't open, in the dishes that were left on the table without a good morning, and mainly in the lack of affection. I wondered if she would ever hug me again, call me daughter with tenderness, hold my hand like she did when I had a fever. Now I was carrying a mistake that, for her, turned me into a different person. My father, the one who promised me care and attention, disappeared. It was that simple. When I tried to talk, he hung up. Then he blocked me. As if all of that was just mine. As if I had made up the story all by myself. As if he had never existed. I was left with everything on my shoulders. Pain, a shame, the absence, and a belly that, although still small, seemed to scream all the time that my life was no longer just mine. It was from someone who hadn't even arrived yet, but already weighed so much. I started avoiding mirrors, wearing baggy clothes, walking with my head down. Every time someone looked at me, I thought they were judging me, that they saw beyond the fabric, beyond the body, that they knew. At school, I lost the little I had left. I even distanced myself from my few friends, not because I wanted to, but because I didn't know how to be there anymore. I didn't know how to pretend anymore, how to talk about trivial things when everything inside me hurt. There was a day when I thought about giving up on everything, about running away, about walking out the door and never coming back. But when I put my hand on my belly, right in the middle of the night, I felt a slight pulse. And that small gesture held me to the ground. It was so confusing to feel affection for something that, at the same time, seemed to have destroyed my life. But there, lying down in the dark, I began to understand that maybe this wasn't the end. Maybe it was the beginning of something different. Even if it was difficult. My mother still didn't talk to me much. But I noticed one time that she was watching me from afar, while I was preparing my own snack. There was pain in her eyes. But there was also a trace of longing. Maybe an internal struggle. As if she wanted to love me but didn't know how anymore. I learned to take care of myself. To wash my clothes. To prepare small meals. To walk slowly. Each day was a battle. But it was a battle that, somehow, I was winning. Even though I was bleeding inside. The neighbor next door, a lady who had always been kind, called me over one day to talk. She offered me a tea and simply said, You are going through something very big, but you are not alone, even though it seems." That made me cry. It was the first time in weeks that someone had spoken to me with kindness. Someone who saw me as a human being and not as a failure. I left there with puffy eyes, but my heart a little warmer. Little by little, I realized that I needed to rebuild myself. Even if no one reached out to me. Even if there was no hug, no immediate forgiveness. I needed to rebuild myself from the inside. For myself. And for those who depended on me. I was still just a girl. But now, I was becoming something more. A girl who carries the world. And who, despite everything, is still trying to believe that there can be light after so much darkness. Time passed, even if I hadn't asked for it. And each week that passed made everything more real. My belly was no longer just a discreet swelling. It was a presence. A constant reminder that my life no longer belonged to me. I started to feel strange things. A mixture of fear and love. Of guilt and hope. I still cried almost every day. But there were times when I would lay my hand on my belly and remain silent. Just feeling. And those moments gave me strength. The relationship with my mother remained fragile. Almost nothing was said between us. But I noticed that she started leaving cut fruit on the table. A blanket folded in the corner of the bed. Small gestures. Cold but careful. As if she couldn't say, "I love you," but wanted to show it in another way. At school the looks didn't stop. But I learned to ignore some of them. Others still hurt me. Once I heard a classmate say that I was a bad example. I swallowed hard. Felt like screaming. But I kept walking. Because I knew that if I stopped, I wouldn't be able to go on anymore. I started writing in an old notebook. I wrote everything down. My fears, my pains, my doubts. It was the only place where I could be completely honest. Where no one interrupted me or judged me. I spoke to that paper as if it were the only one listening to me. Each letter I wrote was a way of resisting. It was as if, by writing, I was able to stitch together the pieces of myself that were still loose. And there, alone, I began to find a voice I had never heard before. I felt a strength growing inside me. It wasn't courage exactly. It was more like a need. An urgency to survive, to protect. Even though I was afraid, even though I didn't know how. Something inside me refused to give up. There was a day when I dreamed of a future. It was quick, almost a flash. But I saw myself standing with my baby in my arms. I saw myself smiling. It was the first time that the idea of being a mother didn't scare me. It was the first time I felt desire. I didn't tell anyone about this dream. Kept it to myself. Because I knew that if I said it out loud, someone would laugh. Or worse, say it was impossible. And I had heard the word impossible too much in the last few months. I started reading things about pregnancy. I got some old books from the school library in secret. I wanted to understand what was happening to me. I wanted to know how to take care of myself, how to prepare myself. Even without support, even without structure. Had to try. My days were still lonely. There were still tears. But there were also small victories. A meal that I managed to prepare by myself. A day when I didn't throw up. Slight movement inside me. Each small gesture was a warning. You are moving on. And even though the world around me seemed to be falling apart, something inside me remained standing. It was unstable, fragile, but it was there. It was the beginning of a resistance that I never imagined I would have. 'Cause now, it wasn't just for me. It was for him. Or for her. I started talking to that life in silence. Sometimes in a low voice when I was alone. I told him what I felt, as if he could already understand. It was strange, but it was also a comfort. It was the only dialogue in which I felt love in return, even without a response. I don't fool myself. There's still a lot to face. Still hurts. Still scary. But now I wake up and know that I need to keep going. Even when everything inside me wants to stop. Because there's someone inside me who depends on my strength, even when it seems to be non-existent. And that's why, even with the world pointing, even with the harsh looks, even with the rejection from my own home, keep going. One step at a time. Because I'm a mother. And mothers, I discovered, are born before giving birth. The pregnancy progressed. My body changed day after day, as if screaming that there was no longer any way to hide. The clothes no longer fit. The pain intensified. And the fear. That grew along with my belly. I was taken to the health center by my aunt. My mother didn't want to go. She said that what she was going through was enough. I remained silent. I swallowed the pain once again. I was already getting used to this absence disguised as punishment. In the waiting room, everyone was older women. Some looked at me with pity, others with contempt. I tried to focus on the floor, as if burying my eyes in the floor would be enough to protect me from the judgments of those around me. The exam was uncomfortable, but what hurt the most was hearing the nurse ask, coldly, where the baby's father was. I wanted to disappear. I answered with a, "He's not here anymore," and she just gave a brief nod, as if I were just another statistic. I left there with an envelope in my hand and a lump in my throat. There was a paper with instructions and an ultrasound scheduled. I had never had one. Knowing that I would see that being inside me left me silent for the rest of the day. When the day of the exam arrived, I was shaking. I went into the room alone, lay down on that cold stretcher and stared at the ceiling while the machine slid across my belly. Then I heard a sound, fast hurried. It was his heart, or hers. My eyes filled up. For the first time I heard something that wasn't pain. It was life. It was real. It was mine. The doctor showed the small outline on the screen. And in that moment I knew. No matter what the world said, it was there. Life. And I would be responsible for it. I went home in silence. No one asked how it was. No one wanted to know. But I slept hugging the ultrasound paper. Became my first record of love. The first proof that, despite everything, something beautiful was happening inside me. As the weeks went by, I started to feel dizzy, strong nausea, and sometimes pains that left me doubled over in bed. I didn't know what was normal and what wasn't. I researched on my cell phone, read reports, tried to understand my own body without anyone by my side. One day I fainted in the bathroom. My mother found me lying on the floor. She screamed, shook me. When I opened my eyes, I saw tears in her eyes. But when I came to, she moved away. As if she didn't want to show that she still cared. She took me to the doctor that day. The whole trip was silent. The doctor said I needed to eat better and rest more. He looked my mother in the eyes and said, "She's just a girl. And she's trying. She needs support, not punishment." That made an impression on me. For the first time, someone stood up for me. It wasn't someone from my family. But it was enough. I left there stronger even though my body was weak. I felt recognized. As if someone had finally seen my struggle. The pain continued, but now I knew that every discomfort, every twinge, meant that my baby was growing. And that gave me strength. Even though I didn't have a lap, a hug, or words of encouragement, I had a purpose. I grew closer to him, to the little being that was growing inside me. I talked to him more, counted my days. I told him that I was trying, that I wasn't perfect, but I was doing the best I could. There were nights when everything seemed too much, when the weight of my belly and my loneliness crushed me. But then a movement would come. Small kick, little push. And it was like he was saying, "I'm here, Mommy. Just hold on a little longer." And so I went, between pain and silence, between judgments and small miracles. Because now, there was a life that depended on mine. And no matter how weak I was, I couldn't and wouldn't give up. The last few weeks came like a whirlwind. My body was tired, heavy, and aching. Each step was slower. Each night was harder. And each thought felt like a hurricane inside me. Sleeping became a challenge. Not just because of the pain in my back or the difficulty of finding a comfortable position, but because of the thoughts that consumed me. What if I couldn't? What if something went wrong during the birth? What if he came into the world and I wasn't enough? I started counting the days. I marked it on the calendar with an old pencil. Each line was a mixture of relief and despair. Because his arrival meant that the time to really face everything was getting closer and closer. School, I could no longer attend classes. The principal suggested that I finish the year at home. They said it would be better for me, but I knew it was more comfortable for everyone. A way to not see me in the hallways anymore. I spent most of my days in my room. The window was my only contact with the outside world. I saw people passing by, living their lives, and I wondered if mine would ever be lighter again. If I would ever laugh without fear again. My mother kept her distance. She still took care of the basic things. She took me to appointments when necessary. But words between us were scarce. There was a thick silence, as if talking was too dangerous. But at times when I couldn't take it anymore and cried loudly, she would come into the room, sit on the edge of the bed and just stay there. Without saying anything. Without touching me. But her presence in those moments was like a shelter that I pretended I didn't need. The doctor started talking about the birth. He said that the baby was already in place. That it could happen at any moment. I left that appointment with my legs shaking. Because until then everything was preparation. Now it was real. Now it was imminent. At night, I lay down with my hand on my belly and cried silently. I wanted to be strong. I wanted to be capable. But inside I felt like a scared child, alone in a dark room, waiting for someone to rescue her. But no one was coming. I started organizing the small clothes I had received as donations. Each folded piece was like an oath. I will take care of you, even if I am afraid, even if I don't know. Even if there is no one by my side. I felt some false contractions. My body warned me that something was coming. With each pain my heart raced. Was it time? But it always passed. And I went back to silent waiting, like someone facing a storm who knows it is coming. One day I had a breakdown. I looked in the mirror and didn't recognize myself. The little girl I was seemed to have disappeared. In her place was someone with dark circles under her eyes, a vacant expression, and a look too tired for her young age. I sat on the bathroom floor and cried until I couldn't breathe. I cried for everything. For the childhood that had been torn away, for the absence of my son's father, for the words I never heard, for the dreams I didn't have time to build. Cried for myself. And for him. But even in the midst of my collapse, I put my hands on my belly. He moved. A light kick, almost a whisper, as if to say, "I'm still here." And that pulled me back. I couldn't sink. Not yet. Got up. I washed myself. I got dressed. Because even though I was on the edge, I knew I was close. And when the time came, I would have to be ready. Not for myself, but for him. 'Cause despite everything, he was mine. And I would be the first person in the world to love him. That morning I woke up different. It wasn't a strong pain. It was a constant discomfort, as if my body was trying to warn me that something was about to happen. I remained silent, watching the ceiling of the room, trying to understand what it meant. I got up slowly with difficulty. I went to the bathroom, washed my face, looked in the mirror. My eyes were sunken, but there was something new in my gaze. It was as if I had suddenly aged inside. As if that 14-year-old girl had been pushed out of her own body. The day passed slowly. Each movement of the baby seemed stronger. He moved differently. And my heart clenched at every little sign. I knew I was close, but I didn't want to admit it. I still didn't feel ready. There was still too much fear inside me. My mother watched me from afar. I noticed her disguised glances, but she didn't say anything. Maybe she was scared too. Or maybe she was still stuck in pride. In judgment. In the silence that had separated us since the beginning. I sat on the bed and started to rearrange the baby's things for the 1000th time. It was my way of trying to have control over something. I folded the diapers, lined up the clothes, and packed the small bag I would take to the hospital. Each movement was an attempt to calm the storm inside me. The pains came at night. Weak, rhythmic. I curled up in bed, hugging my belly, waiting for it to pass. But it didn't. Dawn arrived, and with it came stronger contractions. Still spaced out but real. My body was now speaking more strongly. I woke my mother. She got up quickly, as if she had been expecting it. She looked at me with wide eyes and helped me up. We didn't say anything. We just exchanged that brief look, full of things that had never been said. We grabbed the bag. We got in the car. The drive to the hospital was silent, broken only by my low moans of pain and the short breaths I tried to control. Each headlight seemed to last forever. Each curve made me tighten my fingers on the seat. When we arrived, everything seemed to spin. White lights, hurried voices, nurses coming and going. They put me in a wheelchair, asked my name, my age, how many weeks. I tried to answer between one pain and another, but sometimes I just shook my head. I was taken to triage. They put their hands on my belly, measured my dilation, and told me it was still early, that I would have to wait. They put me in a room with other women, all much older than me. Some looked at me with compassion. Others looked away. Lying on that gurney with the cold lights shining on me, I felt the weight of everything that was happening. The smell of the hospital, the sound of other births happening nearby. It was all too real, and I felt so small, so out of place. My mother sat in a corner of the room, silent. She didn't hold my hand. She didn't speak to me. But she was there. And strange as it may seem, that gave me some strength. I wasn't completely alone. Even though the silence still separated us. The hours passed slowly. The contractions came stronger. I tried to breathe like I had read in the texts. I took a deep breath, let it out slowly. But sometimes I could only cry softly. The fear was great. The tiredness was even greater. I remembered everything I had experienced up until that point. The rejections, the abandonment, the harsh words. And yet there I was, lying in a hospital, about to bring into the world someone I had not even met yet, but who was already the reason I had not given up. Closed my eyes. Not to sleep because the pain wouldn't let me, but to try to find a place inside myself where I could hold on, where I could remember that, despite everything, I was there, and that somehow I would make it, because now it wasn't about me anymore. It was about him, and even with my heart in pieces, I knew he deserved to be born, knowing that, even broken, I fought for him until the end. The pain became unbearable. Each contraction was like a gigantic wave that dragged me down, leaving me breathless, without ground. I screamed, but I didn't even know if anyone could hear me. Felt like I was alone in the world. The nurse looked at me quickly and said it was time. My body was ready. Or at least that's what they said. Because inside I wasn't. Nothing in me was ready for that. I was just a girl with a broken heart. They put me on the stretcher and pushed me through the corridors. The white ceiling passed quickly above me, and I tried to control my panic. It was as if time had stopped, and at the same time everything was happening too quickly. I entered the delivery room shaking. My body was sweating cold. My hands were freezing. My legs were weak. I wanted to run away from there. I wanted to go back in time. I wanted anything to take me out of that reality. But there was no way. I had already gone too far. The commands began. Breathe. Strength. One more time. I heard everything as if I were far away. As if my soul had left my body and was just observing that scene from the outside. And then, the most acute pain I had ever felt in my entire life came. I screamed. I screamed because it felt like my body was being torn apart. I screamed because no one told me it would be like this. I screamed because I was afraid I wouldn't be able to do it. And I cried. Because it was too much pain for just one girl. The voices around me tried to guide me. A nurse squeezed my hand. Another told me not to give up. But inside me there was only one thought. He needs to come. He needs to be okay. He can't pay for what I went through. After one last push, I heard a cry. A high-pitched, shrill, desperate sound. And in that second everything stopped. It was as if the whole world had gone silent so that I could hear that one sound. My heart beat differently. As if it were different. As if it had been rebuilt at that moment. I couldn't say anything. I just cried. I cried with pain, with relief, with fear. I cried because he was alive. 'Cause I was alive. Because against all odds he had been born. They placed him in my arms. Red, wrinkled, and yet the most beautiful being I had ever seen. His eyes were closed, but he was crying. And his crying pierced everything I was. Pierced me completely. I didn't know what to say. I just hugged him even though I was awkward. My body still hurt, my mind was still confused. But there was something there between us. An invisible, immediate bond. As if he had been born and, at the same time, made me be born again. My mother came into the room later. She stopped at the door. She looked at me with teary eyes, but didn't say anything. For the first time, I saw something in her that I hadn't seen before. A bit of tenderness. It wasn't acceptance. But it was the beginning of something. The doctor said that everything was fine. That he was strong. Healthy. And when I heard that, I broke down again. Because for a while I had believed that nothing would work out. But there he was. Whole. Alive. Green. I held him in my chest for an indescribable amount of time. I didn't care about anything else. The pain, the world, the past. Everything was suspended. There was only that moment. And I knew that from then on, nothing would be the same again. There, in that cold hospital room, hurt, exhausted, I understood what love was. Not the romantic love that I had been promised one day, but the love that is born from pain, from surrender, from renunciation. The love that survives when everything else breaks. The delivery room fell silent after he stopped crying. It was as if time had stopped, as if everything around me was waiting for me to breathe again. And when I finally did, I realized that my hands were shaking. Still holding him in my arms, I felt the warmth of his fragile body touching my chest. I didn't know how to hold him. I didn't know how to look. I stood there motionless, as if I was afraid of breaking that little being who, somehow, depended on me completely. The nurses performed the procedures. They took him for a few minutes to clean, weigh, and measure him. And just watching him being taken away made my chest hurt. A pain that was different from the physical one. A pain that was born from instinct. From the connection. As if they had ripped something out of me. When they put me in a wheelchair and took me to the room, he was already there. Lying in the acrylic crib next to the bed. Oh small. Oh quiet. I didn't know if he was sleeping, if he was okay, if he felt my presence. My mother stayed in the room for a while, but then she left. She said she needed to take care of things at home. And I stayed there. Alone. With my body in pain, the stitches still throbbing, and a baby by my side who depended on me for everything. I tried to get up. I felt as if my soul was sewn together with my wounded body. Each step was difficult, but I went to him. I looked inside that crib and, for the first time, I felt a fear I had never felt before. How was I going to take care of him? How could a girl who barely knew how to take care of herself protect another life? That question hit me like a punch. It wasn't just about me anymore. He was real. He was there. And now, everything depended on me. In the hospital, the looks came in disguised. Nurses who whispered among themselves. Others who pretended to be kind, but treated me as if I had committed a crime. And each gesture reminded me of my age, my condition, the loneliness I carried. I tried to breastfeed. Hurt. Not just physically. Hurt inside. Because I didn't know what I was doing. Because he cried and I didn't know if it was hunger, cold, pain, or longing for a safer place than this world. I spent the night awake. Listening to his breathing. Watching his face. He seemed at peace. But I wasn't. Every sound in the hospital made me shiver. I was afraid of everything. Afraid of making mistakes. Afraid of being insufficient. The next morning, the social worker came to my room. She asked me questions. Lots of them. About the pregnancy. About school. About family. I felt like she wanted to know if I was capable of being a mother. As if anyone could measure that in words. I answered in a low voice. I tried not to cry. I tried to appear strong. But inside I was just a girl with her world falling apart. And yet I looked at him and thought, for you I'll try. Even though I'm scared. Even though I don't know how. When they finally discharged me, I felt a lump in my throat. The hospital scared me, but leaving there seemed even scarier. It was as if everything outside was colder, harder, crueler. And I would have to face it with a baby in my arms. I left with him in my arms. My mother by my side in silence. The sun was shining, but I only felt cold inside. Life outside hadn't changed. People went on their way. And there I was, with my life changed forever. Inside the car on the way back I looked at him. He was sleeping peacefully. And I wished, from the bottom of my heart, that he would never know the pain that brought me here. That he would not carry the scars that I carry. that he would have a better story than mine. Arriving home was like crossing a minefield. Nothing seemed familiar to me. Every corner seemed colder, more cramped, as if the environment itself was trying to remind me that everything was different now. And it really was. They put a makeshift crib in my room. They used an old dresser, decorated it with a light-colored cloth, and placed some diapers next to it. But there was no affection in it. It was just functional. It was just what was necessary so that he would have a place to sleep. The first night he cried so much that I thought my chest would break. I didn't know if it was hunger or pain. My mother, in the next room, banged on the wall as if to tell him to be quiet. And I, curled up, tried to rock him in my arms, even though I didn't have the strength. Fatigue consumed me like fire. The stitches still hurt. I could barely sit up straight, but I couldn't afford to rest. Every little movement he made me alert, tense, ready to act, even though I didn't know how. I didn't sleep. I just sat there with him in my arms, trying to keep up with his breathing. I wondered if every mother went through this. If every mother felt so alone, so unprepared, so invisible. But I had no one to ask. On the second day, my mother went back to work. She said she couldn't stop her life because of me. And I stayed there, staring at the clock. Time passed slowly, as if it were mocking me. And each minute was a new challenge. He cried non-stop, and often I cried along with him. In silence, of course. So as not to bother him. So as not to seem weak. But it was impossible not to break down. There was pain everywhere. In my body, in my mind, in my soul. The neighbors started to comment. I could hear it in the corners, through the windows, in the whispers. That girl who showed up pregnant now has the baby. They said my name as if it were a warning. As if my story were a mistake being exposed to the world. I tried to go out with him in my arms, just as far as the front of the house. I wanted to get some sun, breathe something other than the smell of sour milk and dirty diapers. But I only had to step outside the gate to feel the stares. No one said anything to me. They just stared. And it hurt more than if they had insulted me. I went back inside with tears in my eyes. He was sleeping on my lap and seemed so oblivious to the world. I wanted him to stay that way. That he would never know what it was like to be judged for existing. That he would never feel what I felt every day. The house became quieter. My mother barely spoke to me. My stepfather avoided me. He treated me as if I were an inconvenient guest. As if that baby had ruined everything. But he hadn't. He had just arrived. And I tried to remember that all the time. Washing clothes, changing diapers, breastfeeding with cracked breasts. All of this became routine. And even without really knowing what I was doing, I tried. I tried because he wasn't to blame for anything. I tried because he needed me. Sometimes I would look at him sleeping and wonder if one day he would understand. If one day he would know how much it hurt me to have him in a world that had turned its back on me. But then I would fall silent. Because this wasn't a question for him. It was for me. In the few moments when he smiled in his sleep, a kind of warmth would be born in me. It wasn't happiness. It was resistance. It was as if that little smile told me, you're still here. You can still handle it, even when you think you can't. And that's how the days went by. One after the other. Slowly. In silence. In pain. But with a baby in my arms who, even without knowing it, kept me standing. And that, in itself, was already a miracle. The days kept passing. And each one seemed harder than the last. There was no room for rest. I barely ate, barely slept. And when I managed to close my eyes for a few minutes, his crying would pull me back to reality. My mother no longer hid her discomfort. She said that the house was turning into chaos, that I should get by, because I was the one who brought that baby into the world. Her words cut like knives. Not out of anger, but out of abandonment. I spent hours holding him in my arms. It was the only place where he would stop crying. My body ached. My spine screamed. But laying him down in the crib and leaving him alone seemed even crueler. Couldn't do it. And no one seemed to understand. I began to realize how much I was disappearing. I no longer recognized myself in the mirror. Dark circles under my eyes, hair tied up in a mess, clothes stained with milk. I didn't feel like a girl or a woman. I felt alone. An exhausted body. Sometimes I would hear the girls on the street talking about parties, clothes, flirting. It was as if they were talking about another planet. I was no longer part of that world. And deep down I was afraid I would never be again. Visits became rare. Some aunts came out of obligation, said the baby was beautiful and left quickly. No one asked about me. No one wanted to know how I was. They just looked at him and said how cute he was. I became increasingly invisible. I started writing in an old notebook. It was the only place where I could vent. I wrote about the tiredness, the fear, the long nights. I wrote because somehow I needed to keep something of mine. Something that was still just mine. There was a day when I thought about running away. Not because I wanted to abandon my son, but because I thought he deserved more. He deserved someone better, stronger, more prepared. And at that moment, I saw myself as a mistake that dragged on. But when I looked at him sleeping, lying down with his arms curled up, something stopped me. I was the only thing he knew. His only lap, his only smell, his only voice. Even without knowing how to speak, he trusted me. And that kept me there. That kept me alive. The fights at home started to become more frequent. Anything was a reason. His crying, the mess, the clothes on the clothesline, the sound of the baby bottle falling on the floor. Everything seemed like a trigger. And in the middle of it all, I would shrink, trying not to get in the way. My stepfather looked at me with contempt, as if I were a weight he was forced to carry. He never said anything directly, but his silence was crueler than any words. It was a silence that screamed, "You ruined everything." Sometimes I would lock myself in the bathroom with him in my arms. There was nowhere to run. But there, in the small space with the door closed, I could cry without anyone seeing. I could let out a little of the pain that I had been hiding all along. I no longer knew what affection, a cuddle, a hug was. Everything I did was instinct. A mother's instinct that was born prematurely, without a manual, without preparation. But even so, I kept going, one day at a time. Memories of school came back every now and then. The sound of the bell, the laughter in the playground, the open notebooks. Now all of that was just a memory. And the cruelest thing was knowing that everything still existed. Just not for me. I had no answers for anything. I didn't know what would come next. I only knew that I needed to be there when he woke up. And that, even in the dark, even weak, I was still trying. I woke up that day like the others, with the sound of his crying cutting through the silence of the morning. But something inside me was different. It was as if exhaustion had crossed a line. As if I was no longer just tired. I was empty. I stood up slowly, my body heavy, every muscle protesting. I did what I always did. I changed his diaper, prepared his milk, rocked him in my arms. But the gestures, which before carried a stubborn hope, were now just automatic repetitions. My mother passed me in the hallway and said nothing. She just looked at me and looked away. As if I were just another piece of furniture in the house, something that was there but that no one wanted to look at for too long. That hurt more than any scream. I sat on the edge of the bed and stared at him. He slept peacefully, as if the world around him wasn't falling apart. And I wondered, with a lump in my throat, how long I would be able to pretend that everything was okay. Because it wasn't. There were days when I thought about screaming, about running out into the street, asking someone, anyone, for help. But fear held me back. Fear of judgment, fear of appearing weak, fear that maybe no one would listen. I didn't want pity. I never did. I just wanted to be seen, to be heard. I wanted someone to look at me and say, "You're doing the best you can." 'Cause I was. Even with my body broken and my soul in pieces, I was trying. I started to notice little things. My thinner body, my baggy clothes, my eyes always red. But no one commented. It was as if my pain was invisible. As if, because I was a mother now, I no longer had the right to suffer. One day, I went to the gate with him in my arms. I needed air. I sat on the step, closed my eyes for a few seconds. When I opened it, I saw a neighbor looking at me. She didn't say anything. She just stood there on the other side of the street. Then she turned her back and went inside. The loneliness was heavier than the silence. It was as if the world had moved on and left me trapped in that moment. Alone with a baby in my arms and a youth that had slipped through my fingers without me noticing. I started talking to him. Even though I didn't understand, I spoke. I said I was tired, that it hurt, that I wanted to be better for him, that he deserved more, and that, even without knowing how, I would keep trying. 'Cause he was all I had. The words came out as a way to vent, as an attempt to survive. And sometimes, when he looked into my eyes and made some noise, I pretended it was an answer. A way for him to say that I wasn't so alone. That week, I dreamed about my old room before I was pregnant. Everything was colorful, light. I laughed with my friends. I woke up crying. Because that world no longer existed. And the worst part, no one around me seemed to remember that it once existed. I didn't ask to be a mother, but I was. I didn't ask to grow up overnight, but I did. And yet I felt smaller than ever. As if the world had thrown me onto a road of no return, without warning, without preparing me. But something started to change. Deep down, very slowly, an idea began to grow. I couldn't go on like this. Something had to change. And if no one came for me, maybe I would have to be the first one to take a step. I still didn't know how. I still didn't know where. But for the first time in a long time, I felt that maybe there was still a way out. And just for that reason, that morning I took a deep breath. And I kept going. That morning, after so many days of repetition, something inside me asked for silence. Not the silence of abandonment, the one that had been with me for months, but a different silence. A silence where I could hear what my heart was trying to tell me. I sat on the edge of the bed, with him on my lap, and looked out the window. It was just another cloudy day, but there, in that moment, I saw more than clouds. I saw time passing, life passing, and I was standing still, trapped. I began to remember the times when I thought about asking for help, but didn't have the courage. Of the words I swallowed, of the pain I hid. Of all the times I smiled on the outside so no one would notice that I was screaming on the inside. But the screaming was getting too loud. And I couldn't hide it anymore. Not even to myself. The truth is that I wasn't okay. And pretending that I was alone was pushing me even further away from the chance of a new beginning. That afternoon, he slept a little longer than usual. I took advantage of the silence in the house and sat on the floor of the bedroom. I stayed there with my back to the door, hugging my knees, feeling my chest rise and fall in a rhythm that seemed like someone trying not to sink. I thought about everything I had lost. Childhood, lightness, innocence. But there, on that cold floor, I also started to think about everything I could still build. Even with little. Even with fear. Even alone. I wanted to talk to someone. Anyone. But I realized I didn't even know where to start. Who would listen to me without judging me? Who would be able to look at me and see more than the mistake everyone pointed out? I went to the living room and saw my mother sitting watching television. For a second I thought about approaching her. But she didn't even notice my presence. It hurt. I went back to the bedroom, but I didn't cry. For the first time I felt anger instead of sadness. Anger at everything they kept quiet. At everything they ignored. How I was left behind. But along with the anger came a strange strength. As if I needed to feel that to get out of the pit. For the first time I wrote something different in my notebook. I wrote that I wanted to change. That I didn't want to survive anymore, I wanted to live. Even if it was just a little. Even if it was slow. But I wanted to try. I was afraid of the words I put on the paper. They seemed too big for someone as small as I felt. But they were mine. And that was already more than I had had in months. I looked at the crib and saw him moving. I smiled slightly without realizing it. It was for him that I was standing up. It was for him that I couldn't give up. But now I realized it was also for me. He needed a strong mother. But I needed to be seen as a person too. As a girl who suffered, who fell, but who wanted to get up. That night before going to sleep, I promised myself that something would change. Even if it was just the way I looked at myself. Because if I didn't see myself again, no one else would. And it was there, in that whisper I made to my pillow, that the seed of a new Julia began to grow. The next morning I woke up with my heart racing. As if something inside me knew that that day would be different. Not because something magical was going to happen, but because I had finally decided to do something, even if it was small. I got up, took care of him as always. I bathed him, dressed him in the cleanest clothes I could find, and fed him. Each gesture seemed to have a new weight. As if, this time I was doing everything with more intention, with more presence. While he slept, I looked at the notebook where I had written the promise the night before. I read those words over and over. They seemed bigger than me, but they also seemed true. It was the first time in a long time that something of mine felt real. I took the notebook and put it in my backpack. I didn't know why. Maybe because I felt that, somehow, I needed to take that with me. That desire for change, even if it was still just a whisper. I gathered up my courage and went to the kitchen. My mother was there, as always, stirring the stove. My heart raced. I wanted to say something, I wanted to start a conversation. But when she looked at me, fear stopped me again. So I just said, "Good morning," and continued in silence. But just trying to talk was a victory. I knew it would take a while for her to really listen to me, if she ever would. And that was okay. I wasn't expecting miracles. I just wanted to get out of the place I was in. I decided to leave the house. Even if it was just to go to the corner. I wanted to see the world beyond the walls of my room. I wanted to feel the wind on my face. I put him in the stroller and pushed him slowly, trying not to think about what others might say. People were looking at me. Always. Some with pity, others with judgment. But for the first time I didn't lower my head. I kept my eyes steady, even though my legs were shaking. Because there, pushing that stroller, I was saying, I'm still here. I arrived at the little square near my house. I sat on the cement bench. He was sleeping peacefully. I watched the other mothers with their children, all older, all looking so sure of themselves. And there I was, afraid of everything but wanting to try. One of them looked at me and smiled. A simple smile, almost shy. But it was like a silent hug. For the first time in months, someone looked at me without contempt. I felt my eyes fill with tears, but I held it in. I stayed there for a while, thinking, breathing. For the first time I allowed myself to just exist. Without guilt, without rushing, without fear of seeming fragile. Because I was fragile, but I was still trying. On the way home, I ran into an old school friend. She was surprised to see me with the stroller. Her gaze oscillated between astonishment and curiosity. But unlike other times, I didn't feel embarrassed. I just said, "Hi," and I kept going. When I got home, my mother didn't even ask where I had gone. But that didn't hurt as much anymore. Because deep down, I knew where I had been. And I knew I had taken a step. Even if no one saw it. Even if it seemed small. Night fell, and he fell asleep in my lap. I hugged him tightly. I whispered in his ear, "Mommy tried today. And tomorrow she'll try again." He didn't understand the words, but his relaxed body seemed to give me an answer. That's how I discovered that courage doesn't come all at once. It's born small, shy. But when we embrace it, it grows. And that day, even though I was scared, I chose to keep going. The next day, I woke up thinking about her. About the schoolmate who recognized me on the street. It was strange how that exchanged hi made me uneasy. Something inside me wanted more. Not attention, not pity. But maybe belonging. While I was breastfeeding, I remembered the days of school, the conversations in the playground, the silly laughs. Seemed like a lifetime ago. But it was only last year. It's incredible how everything changed so quickly. I decided to go out again. Not to the square this time, but to the other side of the neighborhood where the bakery was. I didn't have enough money to buy much, but I wanted to walk, breathe different air. Maybe see different faces. And there she was, sitting on the steps of the pharmacy, playing with her cell phone. When she saw me, her eyes widened and then she smiled for real. A non-judgmental smile, as if she was happy to see me. My heart beat differently. "Hey, Julia, do you remember me?" Course I did. Her name escaped my mouth before I could even think. "Livia." She stood up, adjusted her backpack on her back and asked if she could walk with me. Said yes. We walked slowly. I was pushing the stroller. She was telling me about school, about the tests, about the gossip that seemed so far from my reality now. But I listened carefully. For the first time I didn't feel left out, just different. We arrived at the new town square, a tidier one with painted benches and young trees. We sat there. The baby was sleeping and I wanted to sleep too. But I stayed awake, listening, absorbing. Livia looked at me and said, "You've always been strong, you know." I laughed, a little in disbelief. "Strong? Me?" She nodded with conviction. "You're here. You're raising him. That's more than most people could do." Her words hit me hard. Not because they were new, but because they came from someone who didn't need to say anything. And she said it. Without obligation, without masks. She just said it. Like someone who extends a hand without fear of getting dirty. We were silent for a while. A good silence, full of presence. Then she asked if she could hold him. I hesitated for a second, but I trusted her. I carefully placed him in her arms, and I saw her eyes fill with tenderness. "He looks like you," she said softly. And for the first time I heard that with joy. Yes, he looked like me. And I didn't need to be ashamed of it, because he was the most beautiful part of my story so far. On the way back, she walked me close to home. Before saying goodbye, she said, "If you want to talk again, just come by the school. Or call me on WhatsApp." We wrote down our numbers, and she left like someone leaving a light on in a dark room. I walked home different. Not even my mother noticed. But it didn't matter. Because I had found a part of myself again. Part that laughed, that listened to music, that made plans. That night I wrote in my notebook, "Today someone saw me and called me by name. And I remembered who I am." I closed my eyes, hugging him. And I slept with my chest a little lighter. Courage doesn't come alone. Sometimes it needs other courage to blossom. And maybe that day, Livia's courage lit up another piece of mine. That morning something inside me changed. It wasn't a miracle, nor good news that suddenly arrived. It was just an awakening. A new strength, as if my tired body had decided it was time to stop crawling. I woke up with my eyes sunken, but my chest a little higher. Not because everything had improved, but because I was determined to no longer accept silence as an answer. My mother's silence, the silence of the world, the silence inside me. I took care of him with the same affection as always, but this time I spoke to him out loud. I told him about my fears, my desires, how I missed myself. He looked at me with those still innocent eyes and smiled. As if to say, "I'm here, Mommy." I picked up the notebook and flipped through all the pages I had written. The pain, the dark days, the pieces of who I was. When I got to the last page, I left it blank. That was where I would start writing what would come after the pain. I put it in the cart and went straight to school. I knew that maybe no one would let me in, but I had to try. I needed to go back to where my life had been interrupted, even if it was just to look at that place again. At the entrance, the doorman looked at me strangely. He asked what I wanted there. I froze for a second, but I answered firmly, "I want to talk to the principal." Just to talk. It took him a while to believe it, but he finally let me in. I waited sitting in the reception area. Time seemed to stand still, but my heart was beating as if it were racing. When the principal appeared, she looked at me with surprise, then with caution. I explained that I wanted to study again. I didn't know how or when, but I wanted to go back. She listened to me. For the first time in a long time, someone listened to me without rushing. She asked questions, took notes, said she would check the possibilities. She didn't promise anything. But she didn't close the door on me either. And that was everything for me. On the way out, I met some students in the hallway. Curious looks, some whispers. But I walked with my head held high. 'Cause I was there for myself. For him. For everything that had been taken from me, but that I was now beginning to win back. Livia was waiting for me outside. She smiled when she saw me. I didn't need to say anything. She understood. She hugged me lightly and we walked together to the corner. In silence. The kind of silence that welcomes, not hurts. At home, my mother didn't even notice that I had left. But for the first time it didn't hurt. Because I was beginning to understand that the love I wanted from her, I might never receive. And even so, I could move on. Night fell and the baby was sleeping in my arms. I took the notebook and wrote on the blank page, "Today, I planted the first seed of my return." I closed my eyes and felt a tear run down my face. But this time it was a tear of relief. It wasn't about overcoming everything at once. It was about taking the first step with my whole soul. It was about looking in the mirror and seeing not only the scars, but also the bridges that I myself was beginning to build. That day, for the first time, I didn't feel like just a 14-year-old girl. I felt like a woman being born. Still fragile, still hurt, but with something that no one could take away from me. The desire to start over. And that's how I understood that starting over isn't about forgetting the past. It's about deciding that it won't stop you from living the future. I woke up with sunlight coming through the crack in the window. For a moment before opening my eyes, I thought I was dreaming. But no. It was just the morning arriving and I, at peace. For the first time in a long time, the silence wasn't heavy. He was still asleep, his little face pressed against my arm. I watched his calm breathing, his thin eyelashes, his half-open mouth. My son. My miracle. Everything that kept me going. I got up lightly, organized the house, made coffee. My mother was still in her own world, but something about her had changed. Maybe it was my firm silence, my constant presence. Maybe she was starting to see me again. That morning, she left a separate plate for me on the table. She didn't say anything. Neither did I. But it hurt in a good way. Like when a wound starts to heal an itch. It was small, but it was a gesture. And I knew how to recognize it. I received a message from the school. The principal said that she had spoken to the Department of Education and that I could go back to studying at home for now. They would send me materials, activities, until they found a safe way for me to return in person. My eyes filled with tears. Livia celebrated more than I did. She said she would help me with my homework, that we could study together online. I laughed, excited. Who would have thought? True friend. After so much time alone, that presence was a gift that life had in store for me. I spent the whole day with a glow inside. The pain was still there, the memories, the scars, but something stronger began to take up space. Hope. Not the naive hope of someone who expects everything to resolve itself, but the hope of someone who is building step by step. At the square, a lady approached me. She said she always saw me there with the baby and that she admired my courage. She asked me if I would like to work with her on Saturdays, at a little market she set up with homemade products. She offered me a fair salary. I accepted with a full heart. It was a simple job, selling sweets and helping to set up the stall. But for me it was much more. It was a sign of trust. It was a sign that the outside world was beginning to welcome me back. And I was ready. I went home with tired feet, but my heart burning. I looked at my mother and told her about the proposal. For the first time, she listened to the end. She didn't stop me, she didn't criticize me. She just said, "If you want, I'll have lunch ready on Saturday." That was enough. That night, I lay down next to him and hugged him carefully. I felt the warmth of his little body against mine and closed my eyes. I whispered, "See, my love, we're getting there." And he, as always, responded with silence and peace. I opened my notebook and wrote, "Today the world didn't hurt me. Today the world embraced me." It was just a sentence, but it carried the entire path I had traveled to get there. All the pain, all the struggle, and now also all the light. Life didn't turn into a fairy tale. I knew that difficult days would still come, but now I was no longer just resistance. I was also a new beginning, a dream, faith. And for the first time I saw myself not as a victim, but as the author of my own story. 'Cause despite everything I was alive. And that, at that moment, was the most powerful thing I could be. Today is one of those days when everything seems silent, but nothing is empty. I'm sitting on the same bench in the square where I cried in silence so many times. But now there's something different. Slight smile on my face. A warmth in my chest. I am certain that I survived. My son plays with a small ball near me. He can already walk. He smiles with his eyes. He already calls me mommy, with that small voice that melts away any old pain. Sometimes I still wonder how I did it. How I was able to keep going even when everything said I couldn't. The answer comes when I look at him. It was for him. It always was. But over time I learned that it was also for me. Because I deserved to live. I deserved to start over. Even if I had made a mistake, even if they had turned their backs on me, I deserved to be loved. By myself first and foremost. I went back to school. I still don't know what profession I'm going to pursue, but now I have dreams. And dreams are food. They feed the soul when the body is tired. They feed faith when fear wants to return. My dreams aren't big for the world, but they are huge for me. My mother and I didn't become best friends. But we listened to each other. And sometimes she prepares my meal before preparing hers. This says much more than any apology. Little by little we are rebuilding ourselves. One word at a time. One lighter silence at a time. Livia has become part of my family. It is with her that I share my fears, discoveries, and plans. She didn't save me, but she held my hand when I decided to save myself. And that, for me, was everything. Every girl deserves a friend like that. Someone who sees what the world insists on ignoring. I work at the market every Saturday. I already have my own recipes. They call me the girl with the cakes in a jar. And I like that title. 'Cause it is simple. 'Cause it is real. Because it was with sugar, sweat, and love that I found my place in the world. Today I write in the same notebook where I promised to change everything. In it, there are no longer just promises. There are stories. Proof that it is possible. That a girl with a broken heart and a baby in her arms can, indeed, rebuild her own story. If someone asked me what I learned from all this, I would say that we don't have to be strong all the time. We just have to keep going. Even if it's slow. Even if we cry. What matters is not giving up on ourselves. And most importantly, I learned that there's no shame in falling. Shame is stopping trying. I fell so many times. But every time I got up because of someone who barely knew how to speak, but already knew how to love me like no one else. My son saved me. And because of that, I swore to always save him back. And myself too. Today, I write this last page not as the rejected girl who started this notebook, but as the woman who was born from the ashes of that pain. I am made of struggle, yes, but I am also made of light. And that light now I carry without fear. Maybe my story isn't easy to hear. But if it reaches another 14-year-old girl who is lost, I want her to know. You are not alone. Even when the world screams that you are, there is someone here who understands, who felt it firsthand, who overcame it. I am not an example of perfection, but I am an example of starting over. And starting over, my girl, is braver than never having fallen. So if no one tells you today, I admire you, understand you, and I believe in you, 'cause I was there. In the depths, in the dark, afraid. And even so, even though I was weak, I chose to live. And living, in the end, was the strongest and most beautiful act I could have done for myself.